I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you for joining me in today's virtual conversation, which is taking place from Washington. I especially appreciate the leadership of New Jersey's Chinese American Chamber of Commerce, the Korean Chamber of Commerce, the Asian Indian Chamber of Commerce, and the Organization of Chinese Americans for helping to bring us all together, even virtually. May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So before I begin talking about the federal response to the coronavirus pandemic, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the extraordinary contributions our Asian and Pacific Islander communities have made to our nation and to our state. I've always believed that New Jersey's great strength comes from our diversity. And today, the COVID-19 crisis has put that strength to test like never before in my lifetime. I want to especially thank the thousands of Asian and Pacific Islanders who have been on the front lines and behind the scenes in our fight against the pandemic, as doctors, nurses, scientists, first responders, teachers, bus drivers, social workers, healthcare providers, and others are doing extraordinary work. With their tireless efforts and the help of every New Jerseyan who is staying home today, we are certainly bending the curve and hopefully starving off the virus. And with the commitment, ingenuity, and impact of everyone on this call, I believe New Jersey will come back even better than before. Despite all of the great work our state is doing to combat COVID-19, New Jersey can't do it alone. A national emergency requires a national response. Our economy has been shaken, businesses have been struggling, people are suffering. The scale of the crisis is unlike anything we've ever seen. COVID-19 has claimed thousands of our friends and loved ones, over 9,000 in our state of New Jersey. Our healthcare system is under enormous strain. Millions are out of work. Towns and cities are reeling from lost revenue, and further, minority-owned businesses have encountered too many hurdles when they're trying to get the relief that they need. I am also acutely aware of the surge in harassment, assault, and hate crimes targeted at members of the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. I've condemned these despicable acts of racism, and I joined 25 of my colleagues in reminding the Trump administration of their responsibility to reject rhetoric that fuels anti-Asian racism. So let me turn to the economic questions at hand. In March, Congress passed the $2 trillion Coronavirus Aid Response and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act, which created a $377 billion pool of low-cost and forgivable loans and other aid for small businesses. The Paycheck Protection Program, which is the bulk of that response for businesses, was designed to help New Jersey restaurants, retailers, and all other local businesses make the payroll, pay rent, protect jobs, and ultimately drive our economy. But as you know, the program was rife with problems. Funding dried up quickly, and too many small businesses were left out when big businesses were able to gain the system. One thing I've learned over the years is that any federal program is only good as its implementation. So when Republicans said, let's just throw another $250 billion at the program and call it a day, the Democrats demanded new provisions to help more money flow to small businesses who are most in need. On top of the $250 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program that we added, we secured another $110 billion that includes $60 billion for small lenders and community-based financial institutions that often work with underbanked and underserved small businesses and nonprofits. Of that, $30 billion will also assist CDFIs, minority depository institutions, community-focused lending intermediaries, and the smallest community banks and credit unions. We all want to see New Jersey open for business again, and I know many of you are anxious to know when we can return to normal, or something I call the new normal. And I personally can't answer that question yet, but I firmly believe that that answer must be guided by public health experts, not the politics of of the moment. I strongly believe that the nation and our state's wealth will rise and get better only when the nation's health is secured. There's one thing that I'm convinced of, that uh, the only way that we can truly get our economy up and running again is when every New Jerseyan believes that their trip to the store, to the mall, to the restaurant within the public square, had that the risk of their contracting the virus has been dramatically mitigated by the government and its actions. Then and only then will we truly revive our economy. And that means significant, robust testing and community tracing, something that I have been a strong advocate for. Uh, this bill that we passed includes $75 billion to help our hospitals fight COVID-19. And towards that issue that I just discussed about testing, another $25 billion to begin addressing the nationwide shortage of testing. However, we have to do more. States hardest hit by COVID-19, like New Jersey, are going broke as revenues dry up and response costs skyrocket. Without federal help, states and cities will be forced to make draconian cuts to essential public services, many of which our businesses count on to reopen and thrive. So I've joined with a Republican colleague from Louisiana, Senator Bill Cassidy, and we've put forward a bipartisan plan to provide $500 billion in emergency aid to hard-hit states and localities so that they can continue both the fight against COVID-19 and maintain essential services for our communities. So with that as a prelude to give you a sense of what we did, why we did it, and where we're still looking at, let me turn to today's presentation and some of the specific programs that I think you may all be interested in. And so, Chris, if we can go to the next slide. This is our small business response by the federal government. Some of you may know some of this, but we're going to go through it. The Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act provides more than $377 billion in support to small businesses. How does it do that? Primarily through that Paycheck Protection Program I spoke about, something called the Emergency Economic Injury Grants, or the EIDL Grants, debt relief for existing and new SBA borrowers, as well as paid leave for government contractors and resources for business counseling services. Next slide, please. CV 3.5, or what we refer to as the follow-on legislation, which passed the Senate on April 21st, provides an additional amount of money, $310 billion, to the Paycheck Protection Program, up from the $349 billion included in the CARES Act. And so the combination of both is about $659 billion of this. $310 billion, as I mentioned earlier, $60 billion was set aside for smaller and community-oriented lenders, because I heard from so many New Jersey small businesses that, in fact, unless they had a relationship with a big bank, they didn't even get access to the application process, since the SBA loans are done through approved lenders, not by the SBA directly. So as a result of those experiences, we set aside $30 billion for loans to be made by small lenders with between $10 and $50 billion in assets, and another $30 billion made for loans by community development financial institutions, CDFIs, small insured depository institutions, and credit unions with assets less than $10 billion. We believe these entities are more likely to be closer to the average small business person. And we provided another $50 billion in economic injury disaster loans and grants. The next slide, please. Now, the Paycheck Protection Program, which is the bulk, the heart of the federal response for small business, if the proceeds in the Paycheck Protection Program we refer to as the PPP are used for one, payroll costs, two, mortgage interest payments, rent, and utilities, that portion of the loan is forgivable. So, for example, if you got a $1 million loan, just for argument's sakes, and $500,000 of that was used in payroll costs, interest payments, rent, utilities, that $500,000 would be forgivable. So PPP has a host of attractive features, such as forgiveness of up to 8 weeks of payroll based on employee retention and salary levels, no small business administration fees, interest rates at 1%, and at least 6 months of deferral with a potential maximum deferral of up to 1 year. Next slide, please. Now, who qualifies for these programs, forgivable loans? Small businesses or nonprofits with 500 or fewer employees qualify for the Paycheck Protection Program. If a business has more than 500 employees, but has a higher employee threshold or meets the revenue threshold according to the SBA's NAICS table, then that business qualifies as a small business. Additionally, for small business restaurants and hotels that have several locations, if each location has fewer than 500 employees, those restaurants and hotels would qualify as well. Individuals who operate a sole proprietorship or as an independent contractor and eligible self-employed individuals qualify as well. Next slide. What is the maximum loans? $10 million. The amount of the loan depends on your payroll expenses. Your small business can receive up to 2.5 times the average total monthly payments for payroll costs incurred by your small business from the last year. Next slide. What costs are eligible for payroll costs and thus eligible for forgiveness? Payroll costs include compensation, salary, wage, commission, or similar compensation, payment of cash tip or equivalent, payment for accrued vacation time, parental, family, medical or sick leave, allowance for a dismissal or separation, payment required for the provisions of group health care benefits, including insurance payments, insurance premiums, I should say, and payment of any retirement benefits you may have for your employees, the payment of state or local taxes assessed on the compensation of employees. All those costs are eligible for payroll costs that can be forgiven. Next slide, please. Where can I apply for a PPP SBA 7A loan? Small businesses and sole proprietorships can apply for those loans already. Independent contractors can already apply as well. Those dates already passed. But to find an SBA approved lender near you, you have to visit the SBA Lenders Match webpage at www.sba.gov/paycheck protection/find. So that's sba.gov/paycheck protection-/find. On this, as well as other information, you're going to be able to find that, and I'll point it out to you at the end of the day on my website. So if you don't jot it down now and you want to get access to it later, you'll be able to do so through the website. Next slide, please. The other provision of the law is this economic injury disaster loans and emergency economic injury grants. These grants provide an emergency advance of up to $10,000 to small businesses and private nonprofits that are harmed by COVID-19 within 3 days of applying to the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan, what we call the EIDL loans. To access the advance, you have to apply for an EIDL and then request the advance. The advance does not need to be repaid under any circumstances and may be used to keep employees on the payroll, to pay for sick leave, meet increased production costs if your supply chain has had disruptions, or pay business obligations, including debts, rent, and mortgage payments. That's the EIDL. Next slide, please. Who is eligible? Again, a small business with 500 or fewer employees, sole proprietorships with or without employees, independent contractors, cooperatives, and employee-owned businesses are eligible for economic injury disaster loans. And to apply there, that is one loan that you can go directly to the SBA. It's disasterloan.sba.gov/ELA. And your small business district office is an important resource when applying for SBA assistance as well. So that's disasterloan.sba.gov/ELA. Next slide, please. Basically, this is a side-by-side comparison between both the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. As I said, the PPP, you can get up to $10 million loan, part of which can be forgiven if used towards those specific elements, going through a approved lender. You can apply for both the PPP and the EIDL, the one on the right-hand side, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. What you cannot do, however, is you can't use, for example, the EIDL grant for the same purpose as the PPP loan. So, for example, if you use your EIDL disaster loan to cover payroll for certain workers let's say now we're in May, you cannot use PPP for payroll for those same workers in May. In essence, you can't get money twice for the same purpose, which is pretty common sense. Next slide, please. The small business, this is largely for those who already have a SBA loan. The Small Business Debt Relief Program is designed to ease your fears about keeping up with payments on your current, or for that fact, a potential SBA loan. This program provides immediate relief to small businesses with non-disaster SBA loans. And under it, the SBA will cover all loan payments on these SBA loans, including principal, interest, and fees, for up to 6 months. So it's to create a breathing period during this period of time. Next slide, please. Which SBA loans are eligible for debt relief under this program? 7A loans not made under the Paycheck Protection Program, the program we've been describing under the new law. 504 loans and microloans. Those are all eligible. Disaster loans are not eligible. How does debt relief under this program work with a PPP loan? As I said, borrowers can separately apply for and take out a PPP loan, but debt relief under this program will not apply to a PPP loan. Next slide. So in this respect, all of this information is largely on my website, menendez.senate.gov/coronavirus-small-biz, menendez.senate.gov/coronavirus-small-biz, and that will give you all of this information. Let me turn now, because many in our communities have a little bigger business and a mid-sized business, and there are some provisions as well for those businesses. Next slide. This past April, the Federal Reserve announced a Main Street lending program, which lends to financial institutions to make loans to businesses with up to 10,000 employees or up to $2.5 billion in revenue. So previous program was for those who had businesses up to 500 employees or less. This program is over 500, up to 10,000 employees, and up to 2.5 billion in revenues. There's about 600 billion in loans that is available. The loans to businesses would have a term of up to 4 years, and they would defer principal and interest repayment for 1 year. Next slide. The borrower would be required to attest that it meets certain requirements regarding its need and its eligibility. And I want to underline its need and its eligibility, because some companies, particularly larger companies, took money for which they could not establish the need because they had other ways of obtaining money. The borrower has to also abide by certain restrictions during the term of the loan, including making a reasonable effort to retain employees. There are limitations on executive compensation, no stock buybacks or dividends unless they were previously contractually obligated. Next slide. Now, there's also some corporate tax provisions in the law that may be beneficial to some of your businesses and yourselves. So let me go briefly through that. There is a payroll tax deferral to enhance cash flow so that businesses can better maintain operations and payroll. Employers and self-employed individuals can defer payment of the employer share of the Social Security tax they otherwise are responsible for paying to the federal government with respect to their employees. That, of course, is a deferral, not a forgiveness, but a deferral. Next slide. So let me go to some questions that we have culled from some of you and some more frequently asked questions. And I'm going to have the question and then try to give you as significant an answer as we can. Hopefully this will be helpful to fill in whatever gaps our presentation has. So how much of my PPP loan will be forgivable? The answer to that is that the forgiveness on a PPP loan is equal to the sum of the payroll costs that are incurred during the 8-week period compared to the previous year or time period, proportionate to maintaining employees and wages. Basically, from February 15th of 2019, which is when we believe that at least in full force, the pandemic was beginning, to June 30th of 2019. I'm sorry, a year before this time period when the pandemic was going on. That's the period in which we look at it in terms of proportionate amounts maintaining employees and wages. So we look at that time period. What was your employee payroll costs incurred during that time period, and then describe it during this period of time. All the loans proceeds that are used towards payroll costs will be forgiven. Proceeds used towards utility, rent, or mortgage interest, not mortgage payments, mortgage interest payments are eligible for forgiveness, but they're capped at 25% of the total forgivable amount. So in terms of wages, all of those wages equal to that sum of payroll costs incurred during that 8-week period compared to the previous year, that's totally forgivable. All of the payroll, of the costs outside of payroll, such as rent, mortgage interest, utilities, they're forgivable up to 25%. Now, there is an argument being made by some of us, especially in places like New Jersey, where rental costs are higher for businesses, as well as other elements, to raise that 25 to 50% of forgivable amount. But right now, the law still is 25%. A payroll cost that can be forgivable include employee wages, if paid family leave, paid medical leave, paid sick leave, group health care benefits, retirement benefits, as all elements of what can be forgivable. Now, since the PPP is meant to encourage employers to retain as much of their pre-COVID staff as possible, the forgiveness amount will be reduced proportionate to the amount of employee reduction. So if a small business lays off employees, the amount that will be forgiven will be reduced proportionately by any reduction in employees that were retained compared to the prior year. Next question. The amount of forgiveness of a PPP loan depends on the borrower's payroll costs over an 8-week period. When does that 8-week period begin? The 8-week period begins on the date your lender makes the first disbursement of the PPP loan to you. The lender must make the first disbursement of the loan no later than 10 calendar days from the date that the loan was approved by the SBA. So the lender has 10 days, then they have to give a disbursement to you. That's when the 8-week clock begins to run. Next question. Can an owner pay themselves their compensation with PPP? And the answer is yes, as long as compensation is below $100,000. Below $100,000. Next question. How do I obtain my loan forgiveness? Small businesses will have to submit a request to their lender for loan forgiveness. The SBA will then pay your lender the forgiven amount, so you don't have to pay that forgiven amount. They'll pay your lender directly after you submit your request and it's verified. The forgiveness request is going to have to include documents that verify the number of full-time equivalent employees and pay rates, pay rates, I should say, as well as the payments on eligible mortgage interest, lease, and utility obligations. You have to certify that the documents are true and that you use the forgiveness amount to keep employees and make eligible other payments. The lender must make a decision on the forgiveness within 60 days. Next question. I've had to let go of the majority or all of my employees because of the crisis. How can I help them? Well, you can rehire your employees because the forgivable amount is calculated based on your average total monthly payments for payroll costs between February 15th of 2019 and June 30th of 2019. You can maintain the workforce size your business had during this time period. Loan proceeds to compensate your employees will be forgiven. Additionally, small businesses that rehire workers that were previously laid off will not be penalized for having a reduced payroll at the beginning of the period as long as they eventually rehire. So small businesses have until June 30th of this year, 2020, to restore their full-time employment and salary levels for any changes made between February 15th of this year, 2020, and April 26th of 2020. Next slide. My business is closed because of social distancing. How can I rehire employees when my business is closed? This is a good question. Your business does not need to be open to rehire employees. Since 100% of loan proceeds used towards payroll costs are forgivable, a small business can rehire and retain employees at the same size they had in February 2019 or up to June 2019, even if the business is closed due to important social distancing laws or rules. And it's a way to use your help your employees. You can get forgiveness for it, and at the same time, you may be able to use some of their help in preparation of reopening. Next slide. I have attempted to rehire my employees, but they have declined my offer. Will this count against my PPP forgiveness? The answer is no. According to the Small Business Administration and Treasury, if an employer makes a good faith effort to rehire a laid off employee for the same salary and wages and the same number of hours, in essence, their employment status is, your offering is exactly the same as what they had before the layoffs, furloughs, or other termination, uh, then an employer's PPP forgiveness amount will not be reduced. Now, the Small Business Administration specifies that to qualify for this exception, the borrower must make a good faith written offer of rehire, and the employee's rejection of that offer must also be documented by the borrower. I think that next slide is there, our final slide. There we go. I think that covers a lot of ground. I know some of it may be somewhat confusing as we deal with different dates and times, but that's why we have put up on our website, menendez.senate.gov/coronavirus, everything that all of the aspects of what we've just talked about, and a lot more, including contact information. We seek to update this on a regular basis as we get more information on the programs, on their implementation, on interpretations by the Small Business Administration, the Treasury Secretary, and others. So I hope it is a resource to all of you, and is helpful. And then finally, in addition to our website, all of our people, both in Washington and in New Jersey, are working. They're working remotely as of this point for the most part, but they are answering their phones and emails, and contact information is on our website, and we remain available to help you with any questions you may have about the PPP program, about the EIDL program, any of the tax provisions, or anything else that we can be helpful with. So I hope this has been of assistance. I appreciate the community coming together. I wish all of us safe and healthy times ahead. And while this is a difficult period of time, I am reminded in my congressional career of very difficult periods of time, of September 11th, reminded of the 2008 financial collapse. I'm reminded of Superstorm Sandy in New Jersey, the worst natural disaster our state had suffered at the time. And certainly those were difficult times, but of course we have never seen anything as we are going through now with COVID-19. But I'm also reminded that after September 11th, we built an intelligence and homeland security system that has made sure that there have been no more attacks on our homeland here in America. After 2008, we built stronger financial rules of the road, created a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to be an advocate for consumers, and created a stronger economy with less collective risk. And after Superstorm Sandy, we built and rebuilt our state stronger than before the storm, with our beaches and shore communities replenished, with others building in a way that is far more resilient. So as we face COVID-19, I see the days ahead being a rising sun, not a setting sun. And I know it will rise and burn brightly for all of us. Thank you for joining me.